explosion rips through an oil rig in the Gulf of Mexico. The survivors can't stop the blowout and flee.
This is not dangerous.
I told myself, either get up or you're going to lay here and die.
2 hours earlier, a test showed the oil well was safe. Now investigators must discover how a $560 million rig could explode, resulting in the world's largest accidental marine oil spill.
Why did this happen? You had this modern rig, capable companies, very experienced people. This just shouldn't have ever happened. What could possibly have gone wrong?
Disasters don't just happen. They're triggered by a chain of critical events. Unravel the clues and count down those final seconds from disaster. The Gulf of Mexico, 66 kilometers off the shore of Louisiana. The Deepwater Horizon drilling rig. April the 20th, 2010. 5 p.m. Senior tool pusher Randy Ezell is head of the drilling department on the rig with an exemplary safety record.
We had a VIP group come out from BP and Transocean, the rig owners. We were going to have a general tour of the rig. And one of the last areas we went to was the rig floor, where they were already conducting the negative test.
The negative test happened right when we go. Oh, very good.
5:53 p.m. The drill shack. 43 days behind schedule, the specialist drilling rig prepares to unlatch from the well it has completed. The crew's work is nearly over. As tool pusher, it's Wyman Wheeler's job to manage the drill crew. He needs to ensure the well can't leak. If it did, it would send oil and gas rocketing towards the rig. He's running a pressure test, which isn't going to plan. The monitors show unusual PSI, or pressure readings, in the well.
PSI is just going up and up.
As the 6 p.m. shift change approaches, the night crew enters the crowded drill shack. Subsea supervisor Chris Pleasant is responsible for the rig's underwater systems. If there's a problem with the well, he needs to know.
Wyman was convinced that something wasn't right.
1200 PSI. I can't explain 1200 PSI.
Wyman Wheeler thinks the well is leaking.
I'm sure we got a problem. I'm convinced we got a problem.
But his shift is ending. Jason Anderson manages the night shift.
There is something wrong with this whale. She's sending us a signal.
Anderson begins another pressure test.
We need to run a new negative test when it's turned pressure. It is too high.
Jason told me, he said, "Why don't you go eat?" And I said, "Well, I can go eat and come back." And he said, "Man, you ain't got to do that. If I have any problem at all with this test, I'll give you a call."
Gentlemen, welcome. You know why we're here. We're here to celebrate the pride of the Gulf.
In the conference room, Randy Ezell has rejoined the VIPs as they congratulate the rig's management on their excellent safety record.
In the last 7 years, this rig has had no downtime. Gentlemen, a round of applause for yourself, all your involved. Well,
They haven't lost any time through personal injuries in 7 years. In the drill shack, Anderson's pressure test is underway. Again, they've reduced pressure in the well, and now watch and wait.
But the one man has seen all this through. Our man of the moment, Randy Izell. Randy, keep him up. And job well done, Randy. We're very proud of you.
Anderson's pressure test is complete. He's confident the well is not leaking. This is his last shift on the rig. He's been promoted and is due to fly off the next morning.
I looked at my watch. It was 9:10 when I left the rig floor. I said, Jason, I need to go work on the crane before we unlatch. And he said, you got your tensions where they need to be? I said, everything's perfect.
Before he turns in for the night, Randy Izell calls Anderson.
Well, how did your negative test go?
He said it went good. He said, we bled it off, we watched it for 30 minutes, and we had no flow. I said, okay. I said, do you need any help from me? And he told me, no, man, just like he had told me before. I've got this. Go to bed, I've got it. He was that confident that everything was fine. Okay.
"9:31. As they prepare to unlatch, the drill crew notice pressure in the well has risen unexpectedly.
Hey, Jace, this thing's going crazy. You ever seen this before?
I've never seen anything like that before.
Below deck, Chris Pleasant's assistant flicks through the rig's CCTV.
He said, Chris, what's that water? I said, it's probably coming from the hole there, probably. A minute later, Boogie said, I see mud. I pick up the phone in my office and I called the rig floor. No answer. I called all 3 lines. I got no answer.
Mud is erupting from the well, shooting over 74 meters into the air and raining down onto the rig. To avert disaster, the crew know they need to get the well under control immediately. They close valves to try to stop mud and combustible gas escaping the well. The crew have lost control. The well is blowing out.
Hello? Steve opened up by saying, we have a situation. The well is blown out. I was just horrified.
You all had it shut in.
He said, Randy, we need your help.
I'll be right there.
It's a calm night with little wind. Highly flammable methane condenses on the rig. It will take only one spark to ignite. As gas reaches the engine room, the diesel engines over-rev and fail. Blazing crude oil jets hundreds of meters into the air. "126 people are on board. They scramble to the lifeboats. Randy Izell is not amongst them.
I told myself, either get up or you're going to lay here and die. My right leg was hung on something, but I pulled it as hard as I could and it came free. Then I felt something and it felt like air. I made it to the hallway, and what I thought was air was actually methane, and I could actually feel like droplets. It was moist on the side of my face.
Izell finds Wyman Wheeler. He's seriously injured.
Well, he made a couple of steps with his arm around my shoulder, and he was in pain, and he said, set me down, set me down. You all go on, save yourself. And I said, no, we're not going to leave you in here.
Before he can abandon the rig, Chris Pleasant must attempt to stop the fire. He runs to the bridge to activate the emergency disconnect system, or EDS. This will shut the well at the sea floor and prevent oil and gas escaping. It'll separate the rig from the well. It's the only way to stop the fire. The only way to save the rig.
Mayday, Mayday. This is the Deepwater horizon. We have an uncontrollable fire.
I said I'm EDSing, and the captain came and told me, he said, calm down. We are not EDSing. I said, I gotta get off this well. So I hit the EDS.
Crude oil and gas continue to surge from the well, feeding the flames and explosions. The emergency disconnect has not worked.
The captain came back over to me. He said, we can EDS. I said, I already did.
Most workers escape using the rig's lifeboats.
When we got outside of the living quarters, the first thing I observed is that both lifeboats had already been deployed and they'd left.
Izell takes Wyman Wheeler to a backup life raft. They're amongst the last to leave. In the searing heat, the last few men on the rig throw themselves more than 18 meters into the sea. All 115 people who make it off the rig survive. They gather on the rig's nearby supply ship. Jason Anderson and the drill crew are never found. It's presumed they were killed instantly when the explosion ripped through the drill deck. The Deepwater horizon burns for 36 hours, then sinks. Crude oil pumps directly into the Gulf of Mexico. The world needs to know how a rig with an outstanding safety record could be struck by such a catastrophic disaster during a routine operation. As oil starts washing up on the US coast, President Obama assembles a team of investigators to find the answers.
The catastrophe unfolding in the Gulf right now may prove to be a result of human error, or of corporations taking dangerous shortcuts to compromise safety.
Geophysicist Richard Sears is appointed the scientific advisor to President Obama's National Commission. He's worked in the oil industry his whole career and was a vice president at Shell.
You had this modern rig, capable companies, presumably very experienced people. This just shouldn't have ever happened. What could possibly have gone wrong?
Now, by rewinding the events leading up to the disaster and going deep into the investigation, we can reveal how this sophisticated oil rig could explode, killing 11 and creating the world's largest accidental marine oil spill. The Deepwater Horizon is the ultimate oil drilling rig. It holds the record for drilling the world's deepest well, over 10.5 kilometers. It's run by Transocean. Their crew have just finished drilling and constructing the Macondo well for BP. A huge steel pipe connects the rig to the well, 1,500 meters below. The well extends 4,000 meters into the Earth's crust, where it's tapped oil and natural gas, an estimated 110 million barrels. But for now, the crew don't want oil getting in. The Deepwater Horizon just drills and installs the well. A different rig will come to extract the oil. The well will be sealed and temporarily abandoned. Investigators start looking at the temporary abandonment process taking place on the rig the day of the blowout. A routine operation the crew had performed many times before.
The temporary abandonment is where you basically button the well up, put cement plugs in place, make sure it won't leak, and it's in a stable and sealed state. And at some later stage, could be days, could be weeks, sometimes it's even months later, a completion rig will come on and hook it up to whatever production facility is going to be involved.
Surviving workers testify that Transocean's crew had set a cement plug in the bottom of the well and were running negative pressure tests to ensure oil and gas could not get in. The crew reduce pressure in the well, so there's less pressure inside than there is outside. If there's a leak, the hydrocarbons, oil and gas, will get in, and the crew will see the well's pressure rise.
The point is to make sure that the cement plug at the bottom of the hole is keeping the hydrocarbons back in the formation, not letting them enter the wellbore. You want to be sure that oil and gas is not going to come up to the surface until you want it to.
Wyman Wheeler and the drill crew monitor pressure inside the well. This pressure data is also transmitted live to BP's offices in Houston. Richard Sears can now see exactly what the crew saw in the hours and minutes before the blowout. The data clearly shows that pressure repeatedly rose to around 1,400 pounds per square inch. If the well was sealed, the pressure should have remained static. For Sears, there is only one explanation.
It means that there is a path whereby oil and gas could at that point get into the well. So there isn't a perfect seal at the bottom of the hole.
Surviving workers tell investigators that Jason Anderson interpreted the 1,400 psi differently. He believed the rising pressure in the well was a false reading due to the bladder effect. He thought the weight of fluid in the pipe that runs to the sea floor was acting like a full bladder and transmitting pressure through a closed valve, making the well's pressure rise. BP's well site leader accepted Jason Anderson's bladder effect explanation. Ultimately responsible for deciding whether the well had passed or failed the test, he agreed the 1,400 psi was a false reading. But Richard Sears thinks they were wrong.
In our investigative work, we did not see and we did not talk to anybody that believed that 1400 psi could be due to something called the bladder effect. There are things on rigs known as bladder effect, but they tend to be smaller, and our feeling was that that's not a viable explanation. Clearly, they were in error. Why exactly they made that error, I just don't know.
The error cost Jason Anderson and 10 of his colleagues their lives. Oil industry veteran Professor Bob B. has investigated 30 offshore accidents. He's an expert in the human dynamics of disasters and has studied the Deepwater horizon closely. His voice was damaged by toxins during his investigation into the New Orleans levee collapse of Hurricane Katrina.
They didn't want to blow up this system. They didn't want to die. And so there has to be an explanation of how they did this. Frequently, we think of things as we want it to be, not as it is. So if we want it to be okay, we find everything we can to support that thinking. So they found an implausible explanation to explain the drill pipe pressure away because that's what they wanted to believe. The explanation is simple, logical, and wrong.
The drill crew missed an early opportunity to realize the well could blow out. At this point, they could have prevented the disaster. It was a serious error, but not irrecoverable. Investigators know the drill crew opted to run another negative pressure test, giving themselves a second opportunity to spot the problem. This time, they judged the well's pressure through the kill line, a small pipe which connects the rig to the well below. They opened the line and monitored it for 30 minutes. There was no flow, suggesting pressure in the well was not rising. Jason Anderson was confident oil and gas were not leaking in. BP's well site leader agreed. 3 hours after the first test began, the well was given the okay. But the data shows that at this time, pressure on the drill pipe remained at 1400 psi. Like two straws in a glass, the drill pipe and kill line should give the same reading.
On one of these pieces of pipe, you see 1,400 pounds per square inch pressure. On another of these pieces of pipe, you see 0. And that shouldn't be. The only explanation I can come to is that for some reason the kill line was plugged up. It could have been plugged with some foreign material, either from the well or introduced from the rig. We don't know.
The crew believed the false reading and disregarded the true reading. They didn't investigate the pressure discrepancy and missed their second chance to see the well was leaking, their second chance to prevent the blowout. The well catastrophically blew out because it was not sealed. If Transocean's crew had correctly interpreted the negative pressure tests, they would have realized this. At this point, they could have closed the well in at the sea floor and prevented the blowout. But they didn't, and they paid with their lives.
And like folks, this is not a drill.
But now, investigators need to understand why the well was not sealed. Richard Sears learns that the final part of the well was put into place the day before the blowout. As the well is drilled, it's lined with steel tubes. Once the last piece is in place, cement is pumped to the bottom of it. It pushes through holes and fills the annulus, the space in the well bore. Once set, the cement seals the well and prevents oil and gas getting in.
The key is getting the cement into that annulus uniformly. That annulus is at the end of a piece of pipe that is basically 3.5 miles long, from the rig to the bottom of the hole. And you're going to have to pump the cement down through that pipe and out. It is, by its very nature, a bit uncertain.
On one of the most critical and difficult jobs in drilling a well, the crew effectively work blind. It's crucial they ensure the final steel tube, the casing, sits centrally. If it's off-center, cement can't flow evenly around it. This leaves channels, allowing oil and gas to get into the well. Crews position the casing with centralizers. These ensure cement can flow evenly on all sides.
The number of centralizers and the exact placement of those centralizers is something that's determined for each well. There's no prescription about how many centralizers other than enough to keep the casing well centered within that hole.
The crucial question for Richard Sears is, were enough centralizers installed? Critical decisions about the well were often made 700 kilometers away from the rig, in Houston, where BP's engineering team were based. Cementing specialists Halliburton worked alongside them. Halliburton's engineer, Jesse Gagliano, was based inside BP's offices. 3 days before the casing is installed, Gagliano works out how many centralizers they need. BP has 6 on the rig, but he finds that won't be enough. He recommends they use 21. In the absence of his boss, a BP worker takes the initiative to fly 15 more to the rig.
I'll see what I can do.
The following day, the boss, BP's team leader John Guide, reverses the decision. The new centralizers are a different design. He's worried they'll snag on the way into the well, a problem that would cause serious delays. Richard Sears follows the trail of emails between members of BP's engineering team.
The bottom line was there was this email traffic between onshore and offshore where certain numbers of centralizers, up to 21, were being recommended, and in the end, 6 were run.
BP engineers debate how they should space the 6 centralizers. One says, a straight piece of pipe, even in tension, will not seek the perfect center of the hole unless it has something to centralize it. But who cares? It's done. End of story. We'll probably be fine, and we'll get a good cement job. He says John Guide's decision was right. He'd rather risk having to repair a poor cement job than risk the centralizers snagging on their way into the well. No one mentions the increased risk of a blowout. Too few centralizers may have set the well on the road to disaster. But investigators can't confirm it. If the casing is off-center, the evidence is 5,500 meters below the sea, inaccessible forever. But there are other possible causes that can be explored. investigators need to establish whether the cement used in the well was up to standard.
There's one thing we know for sure, and that is that hydrocarbons, oil and gas, came to the surface unexpectedly in this well. That suggests very strongly that the cement at the bottom of the hole didn't do its job. It did not keep the oil and gas in the formation as it was supposed to.
A unique cement formula is drawn up for each well. It's a complex mix of powdered cement, chemical additives, and water.
The key to getting the cement right is that the cement itself is competent, that it sets up properly and has the right strength and characteristics that's required to hold the pressure that's exerted on it.
Investigators study the cement formula that Halliburton designed for the well.
How about easy flow? Easy flow. Let's have a look at that.
The well bore was fragile and needed a light cement. Halliburton and BP agreed to nitrify it, inject it with tiny nitrogen bubbles, creating a cement foam. A controversial decision that rig owners Transocean objected to. They didn't trust nitrified cement to remain stable this deep in a well. BP overruled their objection.
It's a more complex cementing operation. If you don't maintain a stable foam, the bubbles coalesce, then they could effectively create large voids in the cement behind the casing, or they could actually coalesce into channels.
Either would cause disaster. Oil and gas would force its way into the well and shoot to the surface uncontrollably. In Louisiana, Halliburton have a cement testing laboratory. They run pilot tests on the nitrified cement foam. One test shows the foam is unstable. Nitrogen is escaping.
There's bubbles there.
Yeah.
Investigators discover that Halliburton do not expressly alert BP to the result. 2 months later, Halliburton tweaked the cement formula and run more tests, this time using cement and chemical additives flown back from the rig. The results show nitrogen still escapes. The cement foam is seriously unstable. No one tells BP.
It's a no.
The day before the cement is used in the well, Halliburton test again, this time mixing the cement for longer. They claim this works. It is stable. Investigators need proof. They test the formula themselves and come to a different conclusion.
What was found was that the density varied from top to bottom. The issue there is that the cement slurry itself is not stable, that it's settled, that the solids settle out. And that would suggest that there's a problem with that slurry, that it's not suitable for putting in a well.
But this is the exact formula that Halliburton put in the well. "36 hours after the blowout began, the rig sank. Pipes connecting it to the well crumpled and broke. For 86 days, crude oil pumped directly into the Gulf of Mexico. An estimated 5 million barrels escaped, spreading environmental and economic disaster across the U.S. coastline of the Gulf. Only once the relief wells were dug, permanently plugging the Macondo well and stopping the flow, could investigators begin to solve the final mystery: why the emergency disconnect didn't work. Under the rig is the ultimate piece of safety equipment. The blowout preventer, or BOP, is like a giant tap over 16 meters high. Under normal conditions, while they construct the well, the crew use valves to control the flow of fluids into and out of the well. But the BOP also has an emergency function. It's designed to prevent blowouts.
The bottom line is that there was this uncontrolled flow of oil and gas to the surface. So clearly, the blowout preventer did not seal the well.
When the rig's emergency disconnect system, or EDS, is activated, steel shears or pincers within the BOP snap closed, cutting the drill pipe and closing the well. The BOP then splits, allowing the rig to move away.
Report to emergency stations, men like boats. This is not...
Investigators believe Chris Pleasant's attempt to activate the EDS failed because cables between the rig and BOP were already severed by the explosion. But BOPs are built to cope with this. If a catastrophic event takes place on the rig, they have the ultimate fail-safe, the dead man. When communication between the rig and BOP is lost, the battery-powered dead man function should automatically close the pincers. But investigators find that one of the batteries is running low. It should hold 27 volts. It holds 7.6, not enough to power the dead man. Transocean claimed the battery was charged at the time of the blowout and discharged subsequently. There may be no way of knowing. Remotely operated vehicles also try to force the pincers closed from outside. But the oil kept flowing. While the BOP had functioned under normal conditions, once the well began blowing out, it couldn't cope with the pressures of the escaping oil. Bob B is not surprised. Damning evidence in a study commissioned by the industry regulator in 2002 had been largely ignored by companies operating in the Gulf of Mexico.
We ran full-scale tests on these BOPs, including the Cameron Model 2001 BOP on the Deepwater Horizon, and 50% of them failed to cut the pipe. 50% failed. Other countries have said, well, this is not acceptable, but what do we do down here? We're continuing to hope those pincers will work, and hope is no strategy for survival.
After a 6-month in-depth investigation, the National Commission identified the mistakes that led to the catastrophic blowout on the Deepwater Horizon. The primary cause was the cement failing to seal the bottom of the well. But there were multiple failings that went right up to management of the companies involved, and multiple points at which the disaster could have been averted. 2 days to disaster. The casing is lowered into the well with just 6 centralizers, 15 fewer than Halliburton has recommended. A decision made by BP in Houston, which has increased the risk of cement channeling. 1 day to disaster. Halliburton's unstable nitrified cement is pumped into the well to secure the casing. Neither BP nor the rig's crew are aware of how many tests this cement has failed. 3 hours, 49 minutes to disaster. A test shows pressure in the well rising. One rig worker thinks the cement job has failed, the well is leaking. Another persuades people it's a false reading. If the Transocean crew had closed the valves in the BOP at this stage, before the blowout began, they could have sealed the well and averted the disaster. 1 hour, 54 minutes to disaster. Having run a second pressure test, the crew decide the cement job has worked. The well is sealed. They don't realize the kill line is blocked and not reading the well's pressure. They don't investigate the discrepancy between the two different readings and don't close the well, missing another chance to prevent the blowout. 9 minutes to disaster. The well begins blowing out. Natural gas and oil have forced their way past unstable cement. The crew now attempt to close the well, but oil, under immense pressure, is shooting through the BOP.
Get ready up here now!
It won't close. Highly flammable methane surges from the well and envelops the rig. When it reaches the engine room, it finds a spark. Investigators conclude that BP, Halliburton, and Transocean each made critical decisions unilaterally, which increased the chance of the Macondo well blowing out.
Take any one of these decisions in isolation, and okay, that's reasonable. It's when you put all of these decisions together that Macondo was allowed to happen. And nobody in one place with a sort of a big world view of how the system fit together. You know, the people that died that night in particular weren't fully aware of the complexity of the system.
Investigators cited ineffective communication between the three major companies as a contributing factor.
Deepwater Horizon was just shot through with malfunctions in communications. It was happening on board the rig, it was happening onshore. Communications, a major explanation for the causation of this disaster.
They questioned whether a drive for speed and cost efficiency drew people's focus away from the extreme dangers they were dealing with. In justifying his decision to use 6 centralizers, BP's wells team leader John Guide mentioned the additional 15 would take 10 more hours to install. A significant expense, as the rig cost around $1 million a day to operate.
While there are many pressures within this business to save time and money and move along, there need to be equal pressure and benchmarks around safe operations and safe performance so that you provide that balance.
The Deepwater Horizon's crew were acutely aware that the well was behind schedule by 43 days.
I call it the blowtorch on the bomb incentive. You can feel the heat and you're going to want to move fast. This well was budgeted to cost $96 million. Well, today it has cost approximately $150 million. That's a lot of money.
Transocean say BP are largely to blame for the disaster. Halliburton claim BP did not give them essential data regarding the well. BP have acknowledged some failings, but say Transocean and Halliburton are also partly to blame.
I don't want to say it could happen again. Of course it could happen again, because the risk never goes away. This is, you don't manage these risks to zero. They're always there. But the industry needs to do everything it can to ensure that it doesn't happen again.
Don't miss extreme angling in brand new Wicked Tuna, continuing on Sunday nights at 9, only on National Geographic Channel. Seconds from Disaster is back next.